Thank you, Melody, and good morning to everyone. Um, this week's lesson will be taken by myself, Clark Collins, Akini Thomas, and Bradley Prince. If you guys can please unmute yourselves and put yourself on camera so we can see your lovely faces. Thank you.
Morning.
Good morning,
Good morning.
everyone.
Good morning. I hope you guys are well.
Yeah, I'm doing all right.
Great. This week the lesson study is focusing on the covenant that God made with Abram in Genesis chapter 17 and verse 7. Just to remind ourselves of what this covenant is, we'll read Genesis chapter 17 verse 7. I, God, will establish my covenant between me and you, Abraham, and your descendants after you throughout their generations for an everlasting covenant, to be God to you and to your descendants after you. So this is who God is making this covenant with. And it's not just Abraham, it's also with his descendants, right? So we'll dive into that a little bit. So what exactly is the context here? It starts in Genesis chapter 12. If you can go back to Genesis chapter 12 and establish how God interacted with Abram in the first place. And I'll read Genesis chapter 12, starting from verse 1. Now the Lord said to Abram, get out of your country, from your family and from your father's house, to a land that I will show you. I will make you a great nation. I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and curse those who curse you. And in all the families of the earth, in you, all the families of the earth shall be blessed. Now, those promises started off with a command to get out from his father's country, get out of this place that you love, that you're familiar with. It's really something of faith for you to be able to leave everything that you know, everything that you love. If you're an immigrant who moved from one place to another, I myself am an immigrant, and I came to this country when I was 9 years old. And I had no clue about the UK, nothing about it. I knew it was probably cold. I had no idea what to expect. All I had to go on was my parents' word that everything was going to be okay. I was coming to this country. I didn't even stay with my family. We were in different countries, scattered around. So I didn't even have anyone to lean on in that moment to say, at least that's a bit of familiarity. So when I came to this country, I remember seeing tall buildings. That's what struck me the most, tall buildings. It was freezing, it was gray, it was smoky, it was everything you can think of when you think of England, right? And everything was tall. Imagine, and I didn't have a choice. My parents just said, we're going, and that's it, we're going. And I just had to step out on that. But Abraham actually had a choice. Abram, sorry. God said to him, get out of your country and from your family and your father's house. And then God did something else. He made promises to him. If you do this, this is what I will do for you. Sort of like, and it's almost like the promise that my parents made to me, although non-verbally, right? You do this, you come to the UK as a family, and your life will change. Opportunities will be there for you in the UK that weren't there in Guyana, right? So that is the context that we're talking about here. So it's a command and then a set of promises. Now, in Genesis chapter 12, verse 7, really quickly, it said, then the Lord appeared to Abram and said, to your descendants, I will give this land. And there he built an altar to the Lord who had appeared to him. So God is adding to this promise, and he's saying, not only will I bless you, not only will I curse those who curses you, he's saying, I will give your descendants this land. So then we fast forward now to Genesis chapter 15, which we're focusing on, verse 2. But Abram said, let's start with verse 1. After these things, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision, saying, do not be afraid, Abram. I am your shield, your exceedingly great reward. But Abram said, Lord God, what will you give me, seeing I go childless, and the heir of my house is Eliezer of Damascus? Then Abram said, look, you have given me your offspring. Indeed, one born in my house is my heir. So one thing that jumps out at me when I read that is doubt, worry. Abram's like, you keep telling me that you're going to give me these things. How are you going to tell me you're going to bless my descendants? And you haven't even given me a child. It sounds petulant, right? And one could read what Abram is saying, and he said, oh no, he's questioning God. How dare you, right? He's acting like God owes him something. He was like, you haven't given me a child. You haven't given me any offspring. What do you keep telling me you're going to bless my descendants for? Now, this man, he was 75 years old when he left his father's house. This is about 20 years on. So this is a man who would have been retired if he lived now. Prince Philip was 99 years old, and when he passed away, and Abram wasn't too far behind. And he's saying, I lived my whole life, and now is the time when you say you're going to give me a child. Well, where is it? Right? So one of my questions is it a bad thing to question God or to be skeptical about what God is saying?
May I come in?
Yeah.
I'll be saying no, because you don't know everything. God understands that you don't know everything. So to question them, you're basically having a conversation and interacting with as your God. So it's not being disrespectful necessarily, it's just questioning whether or not you need this information.
Yeah, okay. Anyone else?
I think it's interesting because, can you hear me, yeah?
Yeah, fine.
It's interesting because I think in other cultures, especially, questioning to a certain level of authority is seen as quite normal. In our culture, in especially in the Caribbean community, question parents, it's a no-no. Parents talk, children listen. Whereas I've got obviously a lot of friends from other communities, and it's quite acceptable to question, and then parents obviously explain as to why I've asked you to do this. So yeah, I don't actually see it as a problem. I see it as quite normal and quite healthy to a certain extent, at least.
Right. Bradley?
I feel like it's definitely something that should be okay, seen as okay, because God always talks about how he wants us to be, how he wants a relationship with us like as that of a friend. So you need to have real conversations about things you don't understand with your friends to understand like their points of view and where they're coming from. Because if you didn't understand, then it's not really out of your own like love for them or something that you're being friends with them. You're just being friends for the sake of it. Then if you don't understand what they're actually about or why they're doing things, then your relationship isn't as meaningful, basically.
You're absolutely right. And it reminds me of this sort of thing that's going on where if you're friends with someone and let's say, for example, your friend is white, there's a narrative going around saying, well, white people need to shut up when Black people are talking and so on and so forth. And I was listening to this young man express himself about the situation. He was saying, if I have a white friend, right, why would I want them to shut up? I'm trying to understand where they're coming from, because if it's in a position of this person need to be quiet and they only need to listen to me and they can't contribute. That's not a friendship. That is a top-down relationship, right? And I think what Bradley's saying is very similar, which is God, as much as it is in a top-down relationship, he very much wants to be seen as our friend, not in the same way that we're absolutely equal, but in the sense that he understands that our humanity brings about curiosity and we don't always understand everything, as Bradley said. So God doesn't necessarily, I don't believe that God necessarily minds when we question. How we question is important, but if you look at what Abram was saying, I don't think he was being particularly respectful as such. He's like, you didn't give me a child. Look, I've got Eliezer blood. You haven't given me a child. So it's also what you do with that questioning. Where is it coming from? What is the intent behind your questioning? And this was very much something where God was testing his faith consistently. Now, if we read on, we will see what God did in response to Abram's questioning. If we go to verse 4, it says, and behold, the word of the Lord came to him, saying, this one shall not be your heir, but one who will come from your own body shall be your heir. Then he brought him outside and said, look now toward heaven and count the stars if you're able to number them. And he said to him, so shall your descendants be. Right? And it said in verse 6 that he believed in the Lord. So what did God do there? What did God do?
It was basically like a sort of way of reassuring him.
Yeah. He reassured him.
Yeah, basically.
He reassured him, right? God didn't strike him down. I remember doing a Bible study and I asked the question, can we question God? I asked a question about actually God, the nature of God, and if God can do bad and if he can do evil things, and if because he's God, we'll say that him doing evil things is good because he's God. And someone was asking, but can we question God though? Are you allowed to question God? Can we question God? Really jumping down my throat. But that's not how God reacts, right? When we question him. He's not this dictatorial individual who is saying, it's my word and I'm God and it is what it is. He's saying, he is doing what Bradley said, which is he reassured Abram, right? There was a lot of reassurance. And if we go and read verse 7, it said, then he said to him, I am the Lord who brought you out of Ur of the Chaldeans to give you this land to inherit it. Now, what God actually said was, I am Yahweh. And I've always heard that word, that name being used to describe God, Yahweh. And what it means is Lord. But in the King James Version is capitalized. Now, when you think of Lord, that to me is someone of high authority. When Sarah addressed her husband, she addressed him as Lord, because in those days, a wife was to see her husband as a head of the household and someone of higher authority. So Lord, Yahweh, someone of high authority, but it also has other meanings. And some of these meanings, some of the other meanings of Yahweh is the existent one, the eternal one, the self-sufficient one, the one who lives eternally. So these words that are used to this, that are encapsulated in the name Yahweh, how did that alone? Why did God decide to use his name Yahweh? Because you call him many things. Why did he decide to use his name Yahweh in this reassurance process that he went through with Abram?
I would say he used that term because as you was explaining, it's to do with eternal. So it was to say to Abram, I'm with you eternally. And also it could be mentioned that your offspring would be eternal and it will always keep growing like the stars, as you mentioned before.
Okay. Anything else?
I think it's not so much now in the kind of the era that we live, but especially in Bible times, and obviously names were quite powerful. So I think God is smart. And when I say that, obviously not like a duh moment, but in the sense where God ain't stupid, in it. So if he approached Abraham with anything less than what he did, Abraham's gonna be like, listen, man, like when I was younger, if I had a problem, I've got an older brother and an older sister. I would never ever call my older sister. Because if the guys see my older sister come, they're like, bro, man, like, what is that? But I have to call the guy, the one who's strong and who's mighty and who people are going to be scared of. Simply because they see a man coming, it's like, everyone gets scared. And I think in the same way, man, God is like, Abraham, man, I'm that man. I'm that guy, man. I can bust you, I can be with you, I can protect you, I can do all these things, man, if you just allow me to. So I think God is very, very wise in the way he does things, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. Any other thoughts?
Yeah.
What I think is that God is showing his characteristics, like Clark said, showing his characteristics through this one name, Yahweh. How did he introduce himself to Moses? He introduced himself as a great I am, right? I am. Like Akini said, this whole idea of I am and the eternal one, it is very much something that is constant. This idea that I will never leave you for the whole of eternity. After you're dead, I'll be with your children, and I'll be with your children's children, and all of the generations. I will be there for eternity. And so his characteristic as being a constant God, a never changing God, it also brings to mind this idea that he'll keep his promises. Because he said to you, I am going to give your children and your children, all the descendants, all the families on the earth, this land. I'll give you this land. I will bless your generations. I will curse the people that curse them. These are my promises that I'm making to you. I will bless all of you. So when I tell you that I am going to give you a child, I mean what I said. I said what I said and I mean it. I'm going to give you that child because that is in who I am. I am Yahweh, the eternal one, and that will never change. So that's how you can be reassured. And that's why Abram believed him, right? That's why he believed him. Why did God feel the need to make a covenant with Abram in the first place?
Yes, that was one of my questions I was going to raise later on as well.
Okay, well, take the lead.
Well, I would say he made this covenant because he trusted and he believed in Abram himself, in that he will continue to follow his instructions and have faith in him. In a way, like other than anyone else in the whole place that was with him, he believed in this one man to do all of this. This one, in nowadays, old man, but back then probably quite young as they lived longer than us. But to him, this one man, he put all this burden on, but he believed that he can pull through and be able to have faith and continue his work. So that's why I see that's why he put all of that trust into Abram.
Okay. We just got a YouTube comment quickly. God said to Abram that he was a God of everything, the God of the present and the future, the eternal, and his name tells us a story of who he is, which is definitely what we think as well. What other reasons did God have for establishing this covenant in the first place? Because God initiated it. He started it. Why make this promise in the first place? Why? What was he trying to achieve?
I think it can have something to do with like the level of trust that he wants to have.
Okay.
I think it's easier for, I think it could have been easier for us to understand, for him to understand God, if God was coming to him with something like an agreement that he himself can understand how it works. Do you know what I mean? It's not just God saying, oh, do this, and that's it. Like he's saying, we're coming into an agreement here, so both sides of us are doing something to come together to form this bond of trust between us. Because, you know, God is God, so it could have been understandable if Abram was a bit skeptical if it was just God saying, do this. But now that he's coming with something that they both can understand, an agreement that holds both of them to certain standards, then it can be easier for Abram can be more assured in what it is.
Yes. Do you think it's a plan of salvation as well?
Yeah, I was gonna say that also.
Go ahead.
That also God has a plan for humanity. He instigated his plan through Abram in the first place, like, because Jesus wasn't there yet. So this is before that time. There was no one who died for our sins yet. So he trusted Abraham and gave it an escape, I should say, for his descendants and humanity in a way, for time to continue. So we don't forget him, and we also have faith and belief in, so we can make it to heaven. And then Jesus will come along and die for our sins that we have created throughout that time.
Yes. Because, go ahead, Clark, sorry.
Yeah, obviously, I think it's interesting, like, Justin, when you think of someone making a promise, usually a promise is linked to someone trying to convince someone. So, you know, I promise to do this, or I promise to keep you safe, I promise to love you, I promise to, you know, do all the kind of things in it. But here it's not Abraham making a promise, it's God making a promise. So it's almost as if it comes across as God is quite humanistic. And even though you think of, you know, God, Yahweh, you know, he's lofty, he's high, he's everywhere, all that kind of beautiful stuff. Whereas God has feelings, like he feels stuff, you see what I'm saying? So it's like, he's like, Abraham, man, just believe me, you know, like, I can come good on my word, you know. I promise I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna make a covenant, I'm gonna, you know, do all these things, man. And it kind of just shows us how desperate God is for Abraham to kind of, you know, go into this relationship with him. I'm not too sure. Obviously, I know the Keenies, you know, got the nice chocolate skin. Bradley's got the beard. Like, you guys, I'm sure when it comes to, you know, like in your time, especially when you're a lot younger, girls, you know, you say, I promise this, I promise that, I promise this, I promise that, simply because you're trying to convince them, man, that guy, like, you know, ladies, man, I can, you know, I'm good in it, I'm okay, I'm a nice guy, man. Whereas, so in my mind, it's like, God is like, Abraham, just trust me, just believe me, man, just so we can roll and we can have a relationship. And it kind of makes God a lot more realistic to me. It kind of shows his love in that respect. So yeah.
Yes, quickly. I was going to say also about the fact of love as well, that it shows how much he cares for humanity, and the fact that he didn't use the word just promise. I will just promise to do this. He explained and he said exactly what he's going to do and how it's going to happen, whilst just saying, oh, I promise that if I was to speak, so I promise to do this. When I explain how I'm going to do it and what I'm going to do to convince you that I'll actually go through with it. So I think it shows that love towards humanity that God has, that just because he's above us doesn't mean he doesn't care for us in the same way.
Definitely. We've got a few YouTube comments here that I think wraps it up. Yahweh, for how I see it, I am great. I am the way, the truth, and the life. I will be with you and I will never leave you. Trust in me. And someone else said, God can use the worst of us as it kind of shows the best of him. And I think that's a good point, because Abram, like I said, he didn't jump out at me as being particularly respectful with that. He was letting his worry and his doubt take hold of him. And he was really searching around, because as human beings, it is in our nature to be curious and to want to understand everything and to be wary of certain things. That's in our nature. And God, instead of punishing us for our nature, which frankly he made us to be, he decides to be kind and take us by the hand and show us and reassure us. And just as the King and Clark was saying, is that he made a lot of promises. He backed them up as well. He backed them up by mentioning his name, Yahweh. And that alone should be a reassurance to say that it's not in my nature to do anything else but to keep my promises, because I am great. And I am the great I am. I am the eternal. I am in the ether. I am the thing that existed before time. I'm the thing that existed, that's going to exist after. Living on earth, time moves in a very linear way. And even though we have theories such as the Big Bang Theory, which says everything started from this one moment, this one point in time from which everything flowed, it's still a very linear process. And God is saying, I am not in that, I'm not even in that time scale. I'm not in that time frame. I always was and I always am. And that alone should show you that I am going to keep my promises, because I always have. So this is a good way to move on to Mondays and Tuesdays lessons, which will be taken by Akini.
Yes. Happy Sabbath, everyone. Today, Monday's lesson is labeled El Shaddai. I will start by saying Genesis 17, verse 1, if everyone can get that up. And when Abram was 99 years old, the Lord appeared to Abram and showed unto him, I am Almighty God. Walk before me and be thou perfect. So quickly before that, I want to say that this text for me shows that if you work with God and walk with him, that he will make you perfect. He will make you better. Because as humanity, we're imperfect already, but if we walk with him, we trust in him, he will turn us into a perfect being as he first created us. Next is Yahweh has appeared to Abraham several times before in Genesis 12, 1 and 7, Genesis 13, 14, and Genesis 15, 1, 7, and 18. Now in these both texts, Yahweh, which Oksana explained that was the person who's eternal and everlasting, again appears to Abram, presenting himself as the Almighty God, a name that is used with two exceptions, only in the book of Genesis and the book of Job. The name Almighty God consists of first El, the name for God, used among the Semites. And through the exact meaning of the Shaddai, it's not entirely clear, but we can have it as a rough translation as Almighty. The crucial idea in the use of these names shows the contrast between the might and the power of God with the weakness and fragility of humanity, in a way. So I would say that with that name, it shows that just because we are weak, we have someone who's strong and mighty and powerful with us, who can take up that mantle. Just like when Clark was saying about having his older brother come to help him when he's in need, we have that person despite we are weak ourselves. That's one point I wanted to touch on. And then next, I'll read Genesis 17, 1 to 6, if anything like that. When Abram was 99 years old, the Lord appeared to Abram, saying to him, I am the Almighty, walk before me and be blameless, that I may make you covenant between me and you and multiply you greatly. Then Abram fell on his face, and God said to him, Behold, my covenant is with you, and you shall be the father of a multitude of nations. No longer shall your name be called Abram, but your name shall be Abraham, for I have made you the father of a multitude of nations. I will make you exceedingly fruitful, and I will make you into nations, and kings shall come from you. This paints everything to a bigger picture now. So it's not just Abraham now. He's now the father of nations. He's now the head of that household, I should say. The mantle, the first person that you will go to if you were in a family, right? So he's now that king in a way of these many nations that will come from him. At this time, I would say, why would the Lord want to stress to Abram his might and power, despite him already knowing about God, knowing his strength? Why does he need to prove to Abram that he is strong and mighty and powerful? That's one question I want to put out to anyone. Yes, Oksana.
Well, I think this comment came in great because that will tie to what your question is asking. It says in Abram's time, God's name was not known. Yahweh, which is spelled capitalized in YHWH, was used to indicate that his name is unspoken, right? The first occurrence for a name for God was actually to Moses, which is I am that I am. And that brought up an interesting point, the fact that he's not known. Now, I don't know if I can bring this up on this platform, but I think it's the best, sort of like a best analogy, right? If anyone's familiar with the Harry Potter series, I used to read them as a child, all of them. And Lord Voldemort, the villain, he had, his name was Lord Voldemort, and his name was actually Tom Riddle before his real given birth name. But everyone who wanted to refer to him called him he who shall not be named, right? He who shall not be named. And because he was identified as he who shall not be named, there was this sense of fear going around everyone. It brought about this sense of, he's so scary, he's so bad, he's so wicked, he's so evil. You can't even mention his name, right? And that was very much and that was in a way how people saw God in that time, as this ultimate force. Not that he was evil, very much that he was good, but he was also someone that you should fear, right? And so what we see with God's characteristic in this, and this ties back to your question, I think, is that God shows his might. He doesn't necessarily need to prove his might. He doesn't need to prove anything, as someone commented, but he is saying, I'm still Yahweh. But then a softer, gentler side comes through with God that you don't necessarily pick up when you just see him as the great unspoken. You don't say his name. He doesn't even have a name. He doesn't have a way of identifying himself. He's identifying himself. And as much as Yahweh brings about this idea of might and power and this great force that you can't even describe, he is saying, you can describe me. I'm the one who's going to be there for you. I'm the one who's going to give you things. I'm the one that's going to bless you. I'm the one that's going to keep my promises to you. So it's not like I don't think that he's necessarily trying to prove it, but I think it again feeds into this reassurance process that he's constantly going through with us humans, including with Abram, in the sense that, listen, I am who I am. I am Yahweh, the great Almighty, and his might and power reiterates that he's capable. Because if someone makes a promise, let's say my husband cheats on me, and he's saying, I promise I'll never do it again. One thing that will make me doubt is if he's even capable of such a thing. Are you even capable of staying faithful to me? Are you capable? And I think God, by identifying himself as Yahweh and expressing himself and showing his might and showing what he can do, is saying, I am capable, so you can trust me.
Yes, agree. Anyone else want to come in just before?
Just based on what Oksana was breaking down on, I think that when we live in 2021, obviously we're not too sure when Abraham lived. However, we have a much more fuller picture of who God is than Abraham ever did. We've got the whole Bible, we've got Jesus, we've got the spirit of prophecy, we've got all these things in it. So we know it's easy for us to, to kind of sit here and be like, well, yeah, man, like, God is this and God is that and God is love. And whereas Abraham, he didn't really have that. He didn't really have that knowledge, but he had an experience. He didn't really have, the details, but he trusted God though. So to answer your question, I just think that it's, once again, I think it's important that we remember that God is as much as we are trying to live up to the light that we have, trying to, righteousness by faith, we want to go to heaven. God is on trial also, because the claim that was made against God is this: big man, you're not true, man.
Yes.
Big man, you're a liar, fam. Big man, you're not the guy. What you said you can do, you can't do. That's what Satan said, isn't it? So God is like, rough. Like, I've had rumors spread against me before. And the reality is this. You know this? When someone spreads a rumor against you, there's nothing you can do. But it's just like, I can't go to everyone and be like, it's not true. It's just like, cool. That's what you can do. You just have to prove yourself now that what they said isn't who you are. You see what I'm saying? So God is like, listen, man, Abraham, I've got to prove to you to a certain degree that what you've heard or what you haven't heard, I can do the things that I can be for who you need me to be. So I think once again, I think it just shows that kind of I think, Oksana, you use the idea of a linear when you're talking about time span. I think God is trying to show a kind of very personal relationship with us, with his beings, with Abraham, with Oksana, with Bradley, with Akita, with myself. And he's like, guys, man, I show you, I prove you, and then you prove me. And then it's back and forth, back and forth. And I think that's why it's beautiful, man. So yeah.
Great.
Thank you for that contribution. I would say if you go to chapter 17, look particularly at verse 6, when God talks about giving Abraham, making him fruitful and making his children and everything to come from him as kings of nations. I would say that's also giving Abraham hope as well as reassurance. And to Abraham, as someone who didn't have a heir which is from him, being able to hear this from God gives him that hope and that encouragement to keep going no matter what, despite all his doubts he may have. Right, that's why I say it's one reason. You can also say this for the same. We're going on to names now. Names are very important in biblical times. Even now, names are quite important. So if we go on to the literal translation of Genesis 1:17, 1-6, it would be, Jehovah appeared to Abraham and said, I am El Shaddai, walk before me and be thou perfect. And I'll make my covenant between me and thee, and will multiply thee exceedingly. And thou shalt be father of multitude of nations. I'll make you the exceedingly fruitful. You can also say this name also appears in Genesis 28, verse 3, where Isaac says that the El Shaddai will bless Jacob and make him fruitful and multiply him as well. So not only Abraham has this blessing, but also Jacob has this blessing as well. So God had that plan, that God didn't put all his eggs in one basket for him, as the saying goes. He then chose someone else as well to continue this path. Because God had, I don't know what God's plan is, but you can see going forward that not only Abraham's lineage is going to be able to accomplish what he wanted, so he also blessed it onto someone else. So I think God's smart in that way, in that, yes, he trusts certain people with different tasks, but he also can keep the same promise between two different people.
Okay.
A similar promise of El Shaddai is found in Genesis 35, verse 11, also in Genesis 43, verse 14, and Genesis 49, verse 25. These passages suggest that bountifulness exercised by God, the El, the God of power and the authority, and Shaddai, the God of inextinguishable riches that he is willing to bestow upon those who seek him, and in faith and in obedience. Now, any thoughts on that? Does anyone have with that one part of what El Shaddai means and what is the significance of that name?
On what you read, it kind of just sounds like God is I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, Kini, but I said El and Shaddai, and you spoke about bountiful riches, right?
Yes.
So it's just interesting in regards to the way we see God, or the way let me speak for myself, the way I see God and the way God described himself. because here it almost comes across, he described himself as, you know, the one who can sustain you in everything. And obviously, you mentioned specifically, Akeem, or the text mentioned specifically about, you know, about sustaining you in regards to your sustenance, your finance, you know, your all that kind of stuff, man. And whereas the way I've been taught is that, you know, that kind of stuff, man, is of the devil. You feel me? Like, you know, like the money is of the devil. Whereas God is like, nah, man, I can bust you. You know, I can actually keep you, you know, not just, you know, spiritually or, you know, your health, but financially also. So it's God is very holistic in the way he approaches and deals with his children. Yeah, man. And that means that there's nothing for us to worry about in regards to our life. He's going to keep us on all fronts. So that's reassuring to know.
Yes, also I'll add that with this promise he made to Abraham, if he used the term El Shaddai to him, would that made a difference between how we have thought about the promise, as we discovered here, that it could also mean about riches and being holistically well kept, whilst the term he used before, Yahweh, is eternal. So could he say that these riches, as you're saying, are only something to focus on now, but using that other word is eternal? We keep the riches keep flowing from you and will keep coming towards you eternally. That's one thing I just say towards that name.
Okay.
I'll go on to the next lesson, which is named from Abram to Abraham, from Abram to Abraham, sorry. Though these names of God come with spiritual and theological significance, such usage does not end with God alone. Names of people in the ancient Near East were not only just meaningless forms of identification, as often there are today. To name a girl Mary or Sue does not make much of a difference today. For the ancient Semites, however, human names can heavily laden with spiritual significance. All Semitic names of people have meaning and usually consist of a phrase or short sentence comprised of a wish or an expression of gratitude on the part of the parent. For example, Daniel name means God is my judge. Joel means Yahweh is God. And Nathan means gift of God. Because of the significance attached to names, name would often be changed to affect a radical change in someone's life and circumstances. You can see that, for example, even though mine was not a change of a name, my name means, for example, depending on who you look at, means firstborn son, or first male child. As I am, even though that I am the only child, it could have seen something as, oh, I am the only and first male child of my family. So that also has that type of significance as today as well, that some people are named depending on the situation, right? So even though back then it's the same, even now this tradition still continues to some degree. Anyway, if you look at the following text, Genesis 32, verse 28, firstly, then he said, your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with God and with men, and I have prevailed. Well, Israel means God is contented in a way. So God is with you and God is content with what you have, and he's always going to prevail throughout all eternity or life, right? So that's one meaning, that's one way that words and name have significance in the way how God presents himself to you and to people of the world. So not only names may reflect people themselves, but it's a way for God to show himself to people and show how he is throughout history and throughout lives. Like if someone has that name, someone represents that name, this is God telling people, whoever calls his name, I am this, I am that, in a way. Next is Genesis 41, verse 45. I'll wait until everyone gets out quickly. And Pharaoh called Joseph's name Zapanath-paneah, and gave him in marriage as Senah, the daughter of Potiphar, priest of On. So Joseph went out over the land of Egypt. Well, that name means one who discovers hidden things. So just as Joseph was able to help Potiphar in his dreams, he was named one who discovers things and was given that title to show to the people of Egypt that he's going to be able to discover something hidden and be able to lead in a way that will discover new frightful things in a time when they're in famine and they're in a lot of turmoil in that time. So even having significance of that shows how God also is the one that discovers hidden things. And that it could be shown that by this name, God is showing that, oh, I will discover this for you and I will be there with you throughout this time. And finally, the next text I want to mention is Daniel 1, verse 7, which states, and the chief of the eunuchs gave them names. Daniel, he was called Belshazzar. Hanani, he was called Shadrach. Mishael was called Meshach. And Azariah was called Abednego. Well, in this case, I would say for Daniel's name, it has negative connotations, as Belteshazzar was Beltis, protect the king, which could show that in a negative way that Daniel is to serve the king, right? And it's his Lord protector. Instead of being with God, he's being protected by me. So he is my servant and he follows me instead of having his original name, right? So even names shows loyalty and status in a way, right? That shows that this person belongs to me and I am the king. And in this case, I am the king. I am the one you should be looking up to and following, right? So names hold a lot of weight throughout history, right? So once names are given, they are there to stick around. They're there so you can show who you are, right? And show what you are. Does anyone want to touch on that? Bradley, I was going to hear you say something.
Yeah, in the case of Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, I think it's like that whole interaction of their names being changed. I think it really shows just how much the power of your name can hold over people. Because in those times, we had talked about it a little bit in our other lesson. It was about how in those times, their names being changed was a way of controlling the people, basically separating them from their past and trying to change them into what the king wanted them to be. And it just goes to show how much. I'm not sure on the actual meanings of all the names, but it shows how much that just your name being changed can, over time, it's a small thing that you might not think too much of a name, because you might say, oh, my name isn't me though, and I am who I am and not what my name says I am. But they both work together. Do you know what I mean? Like, they both do correlate to you as a person, because if you're being called something, and in them times they knew what their names meant, and if you're always being called something, you can start to believe it. Like, people can be, say, bullied in school and always called something, called this and that. And after a time, like, someone could be really confident and be bullied for a while, being called names and whatever, and they'll start thinking, doubting their own self, thinking, maybe I am actually that. And even if they were the most confident in the first place. And it's just saying that what you call people does have an effect. So something like their names being changed would affect them down the line. And it's showing the real power in the names, that especially during the Bible times.
Yes, thank you. So would you say that names define you and is your personality? And just like God was saying, I am who I am, is your name just who you are? Are you defined by that necessarily? Especially now in those times where your name meant everything, right?
I can you see, I think it's depending on who's giving you the name. I think that if, like, when Bradley mentioned the idea of being bullied, right, and you're being called certain names, well, that doesn't necessarily define you, right? In the Caribbean, right, we do kind of let it define us. Everyone in the Caribbean has a false name. If I had stayed there long enough, I would have gotten a false name. Everybody's got a false name. Slappy, big toe, fall down, this, that. And all over time, as Bradley said, it settles in the person's mind to the point where the only way you know someone's name is if you attend their funeral. Their real name. You're hearing that so and so died. Wait, who's that? Oh, it's X. Guy with the big toe. Oh, him, he died. And that's the only way you know. But that doesn't mean that that's what necessarily defined the person. That doesn't mean that that's who defines themselves. So, but if God is giving you a name, right, that means something because he has the authority, right? And it's something that you live up to. It will always be something that can uplift you and something that you can, it sets high expectations of you. Because when Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were given these names, they didn't necessarily have to live up to it. Daniel, we hardly refer to him as Belteshazzar. He's always going to be Daniel. Always going to be Daniel. It's a name ordained by God. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, I would have really preferred if it was their Hebrew names that went down in history and not their Babylonian names, right? Because their Hebrew names set high expectations of them that they want to live up to, as opposed to the names that was imposed on them by the Babylonians that meant something completely different and did not define their very identity. So I think we're running out of time. So if we can go on to Bradley's points about the covenant itself and then we'll wrap up with that.
Okay, so the covenant itself, there were different parts to it, basically. So there was a part where God is giving what he wants, his side of it, or what he wants Abram to do, basically. That's what the first part is. And then also the promise part. So if I just read it, it's in Genesis 12. Yeah, so it says, now the Lord said to Abram, get out of your country, from your family and from your father's house to a land that I will show you. I will make you a great nation. I will bless you and make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse him who curses you, and in you all the families of earth shall be blessed. So the promise, this covenant, I feel like in the Bible, what I've noticed is there's been, many covenants throughout it that have been such integral parts. And what I found out is that there's mainly 5 main ones. And there was a covenant with Noah about the flood, and then there was a covenant with Abraham, and then there was also the Mosaic covenant and a covenant with David, and then the new covenant. That's what it can be called. And so a question that I wanted to ask is, why do you guys think covenants? So we see why covenants were important when they were being between God and that person. Why do you think they would be important to us now? What weight or value do covenants hold to us now?
Well, for me, I'll see a covenant is like a contract nowadays. Something that even though it's not physical, something you verbally sign, something that you say to someone else that has a weight and has meaning to it, in a way that something that we have to fulfill and something we have to keep going through. Even though in this case, we don't know what the consequence to not fulfilling this contract in a way is. It's something that God takes seriously, and it's something that we also should take seriously in this day and age.
Yeah. I think also that we've seen, like Clark explained before, we've got the benefit of the whole Bible. Yeah. We've got the benefit of Jesus coming. We've got the benefit of thousands of years of seeing what God has done in people's lives. We've got the benefits of our own lives of seeing what God has done so far. And there's not a time when he hasn't fulfilled his promises. So if you're keeping all of his covenants this whole time, and his name is Yahweh, which means eternal, then there's no reason to suggest that I should doubt that he will keep his covenant now. Because as Bradley explained, he made a promise to the whole human race, which is what he meant when he said to Abraham, all of the families of the earth shall be blessed through you. He made a covenant with every single one of us, which is why we need to bring in the plan of salvation. Because the plan of salvation is his covenant with the whole human race, which is, I will redeem you to a place that you were originally at. You've fallen and I will redeem you. And God wasn't just making these covenants just for banks. He wasn't that I'm just going to promise humanity and promise this person that and that person that just for banter. He had a role for it. And the role was to lead us through this plan of salvation that he made us have, that he had in the first place.
Yeah, definitely. I also think that, I think when we talk about, covenants in the Bible, I think it's so great that I feel like God was looking ahead as well, because he would make these covenants with the people in the time, and it would be beneficial for them as well. And he would say, sometimes he would say for your future generations as well. And I think it's great that we can look back at it, because those main 5 that I just said, those, for example, like you said, we have the whole Bible to look at. For us now, it's like those 5 covenants, understanding them, and like lets us understand, they give context and like the framework of the whole Bible, basically. If we can understand why those covenants are in place and why God made them, we can understand what he's trying to tell us throughout the Bible. And it's like helping us to understand who God is. You would look at if you want to understand a person, you'd look at what they've done, who they've interacted with, what they've done with that person in the past. And these covenants that God has made in the past show us exactly who he is and what he's about, because these are the promises that he made to people. And these are the agreements that he made and the standards he held other people to. So it really gives us a strong idea of who God is and how and what he stands for, basically. And
yeah. Just quickly, can I come in?
Yeah, go on.
I was going to say also, these covenants are eternal. These covenants are very long lasting, right? So I would say is God could have just, Abraham could have just said, your children and your children's children, and it's ended it there. But he gave us hope, someone who's a descendant long in the future, way far in the future. Hope as well is in the fact that our children and our children's children will also be blessed if we come from this lineage, right? So he hasn't only just made a promise with Abraham in that way, he's promised us as well through this promise with Abraham. That's one thing I add.
Yeah, no, that's definitely true. I think for Thursday, this is just moving on to Thursday's lesson. This one was more focused on the part of what God wants us to do, so the standard he holds us to. So it says, I have chosen him. He must direct his children to live in the way that pleases me, and he must direct the members of his family after him to do the same thing. So he must guide all of them in doing what is right and fair. Then I, the Lord, will do for Abraham what I promised him. And that was Genesis 18, verse 9. And so in these agreements, God is promising and he's asking us to be held to accountable for something. So I feel like my question was that we know that our obedience to what God has said isn't the actual thing that saves us, because we don't believe in faith by works. So it's salvation by works, and it's not that what we do like earns us our place in heaven. So then what do you guys actually think the point in our obedience is? If it's not ways to save us, and what is the point in our obedience?
I would say, just like in a contract, just like God has promised to do something, we also have to give something back, right? That's how a contract works. You can't just say, oh, I will do this and I get nothing in return, right? So even though we can't be saved by works alone, having this obedience is our way of fulfilling our end of that contract. Not only must we believe in him and also trust in him, but by doing these things and setting out these rules and following them is our way of showing to him and giving him trust in us that we have something of equal value in this relationship. That's like Concha would suggest.
Yes, a comment just came in that says, obedience shows our love and respect for who God is to us. And I think that's true, because when you love someone, you want to, I don't know if obey is the right word, but it could be obey, right? It could be obey, especially if what they're doing is talking sense. If my husband is saying, babe, I think we should do this, and that in a certain way, because I love him and have faith in that he knows what he's doing. And I see personally, you know what? That makes sense. Let's do that. I'm going to listen and be like, yeah, let's go with your way. So I think obedience is very much proof of our faith. Because even though God knows our hearts, we also need to show that, listen, I just don't have faith. I'm going to sit here and have faith and just do nothing. No, faith that comes with some sort of action. And that is us, like Akini said, us holding our end of the bargain and also showing that we trust you, and we also trust that you're going to hold your end of the bargain. So with 1 minute left, I'm just going to wrap up really quickly with this idea that Bradley brought up, which is the idea of obedience and also grace. It says in the quarterly that in his grace, God had chosen Abraham as his instrument to assist in proclaiming the plan of salvation to the world, right? That's how this all links together. God's fulfillment of his covenant promises was, however, linked to Abraham's willingness to actually righteously do and obey what God told him to do. And other than that, God could not use him. Because if Abraham had never even left Earth, if he hadn't left his father's house, how would he be able to see the land that his family and his descendants was able to inherit? If he didn't have ultimate obedience, how is that going to be possible? So just to close really quickly, the overarching principle is faith plus obedience equals the blessings of his promise. And I just want to thank my panel, Akini, Bradley, Clark, you all did brilliantly. Thank you so much for joining me to explain this week's Sabbath school to us. And I hope everyone was blessed. Thank you.
Thank you. Happy Sabbath.
Happy Sabbath.